I want to begin by telling you the story of Edward Frenkel, who grew up in the Soviet Union in the 1980s. So at the age of 16, Edward decided that he wanted to study pure math, which solves proofs using theoretical and abstract concepts. But the only place where you could really study pure math in the Soviet Union at that time was at Moscow State University. And when he applied, they told him that he couldn't be accepted because his father was Jewish. But undeterred, he decided he was going to apply anyway. And his mentality was, you know what? I'm going to do so well that it's going to be impossible for you to reject me. So he studies super hard and he gets on a train and he heads down to Moscow to take the test, which consists of 5 questions, with the 5th problem being so hard that prospective students were not expected to be able to do it. But because he was so focused and he had studied so hard, he actually got all 5 questions right, giving him a perfect score. Unfortunately for him, they also had an oral portion of the exam. They were given 2 problems at random. They had to finish the problems, raise their hand, and a proctor would come over and take their answer. He raises his hand, and the proctor keeps walking by him to answer other students. And eventually, he literally grabs the arm of the proctor, and he says, "Why aren't you taking my exam?" And the proctor says, "I'm not allowed to." Eventually, everybody filters out of the room, and there are 2 men who come in and sit next to him. And these 2 men are professors in pure math at the university. And you have to realize, Edward's 16 years old. These are full PhDs in mathematics. And they start asking him questions. What's the definition of a circle? What's the definition of a line? What's a ratio? What's a limit? What's a function? And he's answering every question perfectly. And they do this for 3 hours. And by the end, he's super tired. It's starting to get dark outside. And they say, okay, enough questions. We're going to give you problems to solve. So they put a problem down in front of him. And immediately, he can tell that this is math he has never seen before. But he's perseverant, so he starts working at it, and he's doing his best to figure it out. And as he's kind of getting to an answer, they put another problem down. This one's twice as hard as the first problem. And they say, you're running out of time. You need to go more quickly. So he starts working on that one. And then they place a 3rd problem down. It's the hardest of all. And eventually they call time. And they start grading it in front of him. First problem, no credit. Second problem, partial credit. 3rd problem, no credit. They gave him an F. And then the professor says to him, "You are denied admission to Moscow State University. Do you want to appeal this decision?" Edward, feeling kind of dejected, says, "No, I'll withdraw my application." One professor smiles and he gets up and he leaves, and the other one says, "You know what? I'll walk you out." So at this point, it's completely dark outside. There's nobody in the building. Everybody's gone home. And when they step into the elevator and the doors close, the professor turns to him and says, "Wow, you are so great. You know so much about math. I was really impressed." And Edward, he was kind of taken aback by this. This guy had been his inquisitor just moments before. And the professor says to him, "Let me give you a little piece of advice. If you apply to the Institute for Oil and Exploration, they take Jewish students like yourself. They will accept you." And so he handed him his file and he said, "Best of luck to you." Now we're going to come back to Edward's story a little bit later on in this episode. But for now, what I want to focus on is our theme, perseverance. How do we persevere when it seems like the cards of life are stacked against us? How do we pick ourselves up over and over again when we fail? And how do we approach the challenges in our lives so that we can be successful when it feels like there's all these obstacles standing in our way? To begin talking about this, I want to introduce you to someone who completely changed my perspective on perseverance. Will you join me in the kitchen? So I want to welcome Sarah Greene-Falk to Kokoro. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex.
Full disclosure, you were my therapist at one point in time, and you primarily work with athletes, but you do work with everyone. You can work with anyone in any situation. And the reason I've invited you here is because you introduced me to a really amazing concept that kind of changed my perspective on life. And it had to do with growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I want to kind of dive in and ask you to define both of those things for me. So would you start with growth mindset and then maybe tell us a little bit more about fixed mindset and what's the difference between the two?
Sure. Growth mindset is when we are able to make changes according to our intelligence or using self-reflection for self-growth. We take people's criticisms and, maybe use them constructively. Where fixed mindset is almost the belief that we can't change. Our intelligence is our intelligence. This is just the way I am. And there isn't this belief that we can change. Many times there's not even the self-reflection. So therefore, we're very limited with any type of self-growth.
Maybe you can provide for us some examples of the difference between the two and how they kind of manifest in different types of people.
Yeah. So if someone has a growth mindset, and let's say I've worked a lot with swimmers, and so there's maybe 3 or 4 events that they might do in a meet. And let's say maybe the first event didn't go as well as they had hoped. They can actually think about, well, what went wrong in that event? And what can I fix, right? What can I do differently? Okay, I'm going to do visualization for this. This is my mental training for this. And they can choose to actually go to that. Now, if someone has a fixed mindset and they were in that same position, they would actually see that, wow, this is just not going to be a good meet for me today. I am just not performing well. The whole day is going to suck even. Like this big generalization of distorted thinking and not even giving it thought that they have control to do differently.
So it's almost like the fixed mindset, what ends up happening is that the person says, okay, this happened and this defines my performance going forward.
Yes.
I mean, in the instance that you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Whereas the growth mindset says, okay, this happened and now I need to figure out what adjustments I can make. They come to a barrier and they're trying to figure out, okay, what ways can I get around the barrier? Whereas it sounds like the fixed mindset, you come to the barrier and that's the barrier, like you can't do anything with it, which brings us to kind of this interesting question about failure with somebody between growth mindset and fixed mindset. So how do both of these types of approaches, how do they deal with failure?
So with growth mindset, there isn't necessarily a failure. It's more about, okay, this challenge has kind of crossed my path. Now what? What am I going to do about it? How am I going to navigate, like you said, or, fix the situation or come at this from a different angle? Where if someone has a fixed mindset, like you said, it's this barrier. They're not seeing an opportunity to look around, navigate, try to do things differently. And not only that, you use the word define, which I find really important. It defines then who they are. So if they come to this barrier and they believe, oh, I have failed, many times they are then internalizing that as I am a failure. And when that happens, when we identify our performance with our core identity, that is very dangerous for our mental health. That's actually when I've seen a lot of my student athletes have suicidal ideations. And it's just dangerous. Our performance does not define who we are.
So if you find yourself in a fixed mindset position, what can you do to embrace a growth mindset? How can you change that about yourself?
That's a really good question. The science is there. So if we can make the decision that it is possible and try, because that's where the fixed mindset, like you said, it's like this barrier. We just stop. And it doesn't have to be that way. There has to be another way. And it is that choice and then attempting to move forward. that person might fall down another 10 times before they end up getting to where they want to go. But that's the part of perseverance, right? Is that you keep trying and moving forward despite how long it takes and the challenges. And as long as you still see some small goal progression, you're moving forward. And that's what matters. So hopefully they can still see the proof as they're moving forward.
So in light of growth versus fixed mindset, I put together a little snack for us. So I have some friends who are from Australia, and they talk about how they don't eat peanut butter, they eat Vegemite. Now, I've never had Vegemite before.
Okay. I have not either.
And so I'm trying to go into this with a growth mindset mentality of being willing to give it a try.
Okay.
And to see kind of how it is. So I've done it two different ways. I've done it with the Vegemite by itself and the Vegemite with butter.
Okay.
And I've heard that the Vegemite with butter is better.
Okay.
So do you want to give it a try and see how it goes?
Absolutely.
All right. This is the one with butter. So
is the one with butter?
Yeah, choose which one you want, and then we'll do it at the same time.
All
All right, are you ready? We're gonna
Cheers.
see. They say it's as good as peanut butter. I don't believe it. Okay.
It's a little salty.
It is a little salty. They also said going thin on it was the way to go.
I like the butter mix though.
Yeah. It's not peanut butter, but it is.
It's definitely not peanut butter, but
It's not bad.
hey,
It's
if I
actually
lived in
pretty decent.
Australia,
So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for imparting your wisdom to us. Thank you for changing my life. Just that one idea has had a huge impact on my life. So, I wish you all the best. And I know that you're helping so many more people, even beyond me.
thank you. It's my pleasure, and just a pleasure to work with people like you, just accompanying them on their journey. It's one of my true passions. So thank you so much, Alex.
Humans learn a lot from failure. In fact, we tend to learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. The problem is that when we're young, we're taught that failure is a bad thing. So just think about school for a minute. When children go to school, if they do well in a test, they're given an A. A is the first letter in the alphabet, top score. But if that child does poorly on the test, well, they're given an F, a failing grade. And just think about the ways that we talk to these two different types of students. To the A student, we will often say to them, you know what? You're gonna do great things when you get older. But to the failing student, we say, well, you'll figure out something to do with your life. Now, why do we do this? Why do we talk to these two different students in this way? Because if you ask me, it's harder for the person who fails to come back and to try again compared to the person who does well. Because the student who fails has two choices. One, they can sit there and they can say to themselves, well, I'm just stupid and I don't know how to do this. Or they have to reassess. And they have to ask themselves, what did I do wrong? How can I do better next time? And what's fascinating to me is that the people who fail and come back, well, they end up coming to success from a very different vantage point than those who haven't struggled before. Now, one of my favorite examples of this actually comes from the world of artificial intelligence. About a decade before the term ChatGPT was part of our vernacular, Google was trying to create a computer that could play the ancient Chinese game Go. Now, when they programmed it originally, they wanted it to figure out all the various permutations of the board and then figure out which were the best possible moves. The problem was the computer kept getting slaughtered because there were just so many possibilities. Now, this board that you're seeing right here, this board is a 9x9. This is a beginner's board. But the real boards are much larger and they have many, many more moves associated with them. And so they realized that they had to completely rethink the way they were going to do it. And they decided that they were going to teach the computer how to learn. So essentially what they did was they taught it the rules of the game, nothing else. And then they just let it play hundreds of thousands of games against itself. And in doing so, it learned from its mistakes. And so about 5 months later, they had it take on a human opponent. And it did very, very well. And today, these AI computers, they're so good at this game that it's rare for a human to win. So how did it become so successful? Well, it made mistakes. lots and lots of mistakes. It learned from that failure and developed strategies that more successful players had never thought of before. I think this illustrates something really important for us, which is that we should embrace failure rather than running away from it. Thomas Edison, who is credited as one of the greatest inventors of all time, once said, "Many of life's failures are people who didn't realize how close they were to success when they gave up." If you spend time reading about Edison's work, what you will find is that many of his failures became seeds that gave him other ideas for different inventions. And so I think one could argue that it was his willingness to fail that made him so successful. So what this tells us is that progress is really the accumulation of failure until that failure produces something original. And unfortunately, I feel like originality is being squeezed out of our society because we're so afraid to fail. So the question that we need to answer next is, how can we gain the perseverance to not give up when we encounter failure? Will you join me upstairs? Here's the thing. We should all strive to have a growth mindset because it's through a growth mindset that we can reach our full potential. But let's be honest, failure is really hard. It's painful to fail. It's so challenging to get yourself up over and over again when you've failed. I've been in that place where the pain of failure has been so great that I've been like, you know what? Screw it. I don't want to do it anymore. It's not worth my time. But today when that happens to me, I always ask myself the question, okay, what can you learn from this failure? And how can I use it to be more successful in another type of challenge where I might actually really thrive? And what I've discovered is that ultimately, when you want to move from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, that you have to be willing to take on new challenges. You have to be willing to try new things. My suggestion would be to start small. So, for example, maybe you go out with a group as opposed to staying home by yourself. Maybe you take a class to learn a new skill. Maybe there's this idea that you've had up in your mind, you want to write a story about it or just write the idea down in general. Or maybe you've been wanting to lose weight, so you change your diet. But when you try these new challenges, don't beat yourself up if it doesn't go well the first time or you don't get the results that you want. The fact is, when we try something that we've never tried before, it's probably not going to go the way we expect. So when you fail, what you need to do is ask yourself, what can I learn from this? And you may even want to solicit feedback, which can be super scary because none of us want to be criticized. But that feedback, it can really help us to be able to do better next time. And I want you to know the fact that you're even trying something new, that's a big deal. Most people never challenge themselves to new things. So please know that I'm proud of you for putting yourself out there, for pushing your boundaries, for risking failure. Which reminds me, I need to finish telling you the story of Edward Frenkel. So Edward did follow the advice of that professor. He applied to the Institute of Oil and Exploration. And it wasn't long before one of his professors realized just how brilliant he was at math. So this professor, he reached out to Dmitri Fuchs, who was one of the most famous mathematicians in all of Russia. And Fuchs, he was part of a small group of professors who worked with promising Jewish students who had been shut out of academia. So Edward goes to meet with Fuchs, and Fuchs wants to test his mettle. He wants to see how good he is. So he gives him a problem. Now, this isn't a problem that we would be given in school where the teacher already knows the answer. This is a problem that no one has ever solved. And Edward has no idea if this is going to take 3 months, 3 years, 300 years, no concept. But he takes the problem and he goes and he just starts working on it day and night. And one day he's sitting there with all these papers strewn across his desk, and the pattern just emerges to him from the page, and he sees the solution. And he realizes in this moment that he is in possession of something that no one has ever seen before. And no one can take that away from him, especially those professors at Moscow State University. So he takes his solution to Dimitri Fuchs, who looks it over backwards and forwards. And Fuchs eventually looks at him and he says, "You did it. You solved a problem that no one else was able to solve. What do you want to do next?" And Edward looks at Fuchs and says, "I want another problem." So no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter how you feel, please know that you are loved, you are seen, and you are cared for. If by no one else, by me. My name is Alex Lang, and until next time.